Well, friends, good morning again. You are welcome to have a seat. It is my pleasure to introduce today's guest preacher, Reverend Letiah Fraser. Letiah is one of the Open Table residents. She is a fabulous preacher, a community organizer, and someone who I so enjoy getting to talk with and learn from. And today she will be actually preaching from the perspective of one of the characters in the story, actually the woman in the crowd. And so I'm going to read today's scripture passage, which comes from the Gospel according to Luke chapter 8, starting in verse 40. And I invite you to listen to these words before I turn it over to Letiah to share this story, this perspective from the woman in the crowds. Friends, let us hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. When Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they had been waiting for him. A man named Jairus, who was a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet. He pleaded with Jesus to come to his house because his only daughter, a 12-year-old, was dying. As Jesus moved, he faced smothering crowds. A woman was there who had been bleeding for 12 years. She had spent her entire livelihood on doctors, but no one could heal her. She came up behind Jesus and touched the hem of his clothes, and at once her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When everyone denied it, Jesus said, "Master, the crowds are surrounding you and pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." When the woman saw that she could not escape notice, she came trembling and fell before Jesus. In front of everyone, she explained why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. "Daughter, your faith has healed you," Jesus said. "Go in peace." While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the synagogue leader's house saying to Jairus, "Your daughter has died. Don't bother Jesus any longer." When Jesus heard this, he responded, "Do not be afraid. Just keep trusting, and she will be healed." When he came to the house, he didn't allow anyone to enter with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. They were all crying and mourning for the daughter, but Jesus said, "Do not cry. She is not dead, she is only sleeping." They laughed at him because they knew that she was already dead. Taking her hand, Jesus called out, "Child, get up." Her life returned, and she got up at once. He directed them to give her something to eat. Her parents were beside themselves with joy, but Jesus ordered them to tell no one what had happened. Friends, may God bless our understanding of this holy word, this holy wisdom. Thanks be to God.
So I think, can you hear me? Thank you. I think it's fair to say that when you encounter Jesus, it makes a lasting impact on your life. I want to tell you a story about a day when I was in desperation and my encounter with Jesus made a lasting impact on my life. I wasn't the only one there that day who had this experience. I'm not sure, but I think he would also say, this high-ranking official, that his encounter with Jesus had a lasting impact on him as well. So let me tell you the story. Can you imagine what it's like to live in my skin, to live as a woman with little to no value, and what's worse, to live with a medical condition that had no cure? It had been 12 long, disappointing years of doctor's appointments after doctor's appointments. And each time I would go to the doctor, I'd go with hope that maybe this doctor would be the one that would have the remedy to my bleeding problem. But each time, they would take my money and then say, "Sorry, there's nothing I could do for you." I wondered if there would ever be a day where I didn't have to go through the crowds and yell, "Unclean, unclean," because I had a bleeding problem. I was penniless at this point, out of resources, tired. I don't know about you, but I wonder if you know what it feels like to be out of resources and money. So I heard about this man named Jesus. Some said he was a prophet, others said he was a teacher, and still others said he's the Messiah. Well, I'm still not quite sure what I think about Jesus. I'm pretty sure that there are people in this room right now who is not sure about what they think about Jesus. And that's okay. You're in good company. So around town, I was hearing that Jesus healed those who were blind, and Jesus healed those who were deaf, and Jesus healed those who couldn't walk. So I thought for sure he could heal my bleeding problem. This problem that had caused me to have no resources, feel like I was out of options, tired. And so I made my way into the crowd. I broke the rule just once, and I didn't yell unclean. I actually camouflaged myself within the crowd and made my way slowly to Jesus. There was a point where I was really close to Jesus, but then I heard the official. His name was Jairus. He looked desperate too, because I could recognize that look in his eye. Apparently, he had a 12-year-old daughter who was near death, and he was willing to break protocol too and bow before Jesus and ask Jesus for help. Love can make you do some strange things. But I don't know about you, but have you ever felt like you were running out of time? So I understood. And yet, I wanted to interrupt Jesus, and so I did. I didn't want to miss my chance to get my healing because I believed in the myth of scarcity. And I didn't want to miss my healing while he was on the way to go heal someone else. I know, I really do. I know. It sounds bad, but it had been 12 long years of suffering. And I did not plan to speak to Jesus because if he was the Messiah, then all I would need to do was touch the edge of his garment and I would be healed. I could just disappear into the crowd, unnoticed, but healed. So I finally got up enough courage to do it. I touched the edge of his garment and I was healed. I wanted to scream, I'm healed, but I didn't. I remained silent, like I had done every time. The crowd would look at me with their disappointing glances, their looks of disgust and pity when I had to yell, unclean. And so I remained silent and I tried to get away, but I couldn't because Jesus stopped. He stopped. He had noticed me. He had noticed me, a woman, and a woman with a bleeding problem that was now healed. He said someone had touched him. His disciples and people were in the crowd were trying to persuade Jesus. Well, of course, there's crowds and crowds of people around you. People are bound to brush against you. But no, Jesus knew that someone who needed healing had intentionally brushed and touched the edge of his clothes because they were desperate for healing. What I know now that I didn't know then was that God is a God of abundance. Jesus works out of abundance and not scarcity. That Jesus could handle my problem and have time to meet the needs that Jairus had. We were not in competition with one another. There was enough resources and time for both of us. So I tried and I tried to hide. And when I realized that Jesus was not going to move until I revealed myself, I made my way through the crowd, this time closer and closer to Jesus. What I was afraid of, well, I guess there were two things I was afraid of. Okay, hopefully. Okay. There were two things I was afraid of. First, I was afraid of the crowd. Who was I? A woman with a bleeding problem? Who was I? But as I was making my way to Jesus, someone had come to tell Jairus that his daughter had died and that he didn't have to bother Jesus any longer. I felt like an interruption, a burden, and I was still scared to reveal myself because the crowd would think, if he was not helping you, he would have been able to help that high-ranking official's daughter. After all, she was 12 years old. But anyway, I got to Jesus. I fell at his feet, and I was trembling, and I said who I was and why I had come to see him and that I had been instantly healed. What Jesus would say, because I was used to being on the fringes of society. Would it still be the status quo? I was afraid. But what I didn't understand then, that I understand now, is that Jesus is a God of abundance. And that when you operate from a place of abundance, then all of who you are notices those unspoken needs, those people that others don't notice, those situations that often get ignored. And all of who you are and all of your being wants to help so that that person is no longer in the margins. Because when you live from a place of abundance, all are family. No one is in competition with one another. So Jesus must have sensed my anxiety and also Jairus' grief over the news of his daughter's death. And so he says, don't be afraid, only believe. I took a breath, and then he says, daughter, I hadn't been called my name in so long. I was just a woman with a bleeding problem. I was not part of the society because of it. I couldn't go to religious services because I was unclean. But in that moment, I became family. He said, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." So when you come from a place of abundance and not a place of scarcity, there's enough for everyone. So that day, Jesus did go to the house of Jairus and heal his daughter as well. I don't know much of his story, but if he were here, I bet he would say that he learned that God is a God of abundance and not scarcity. I bet that he would invite us, just as I want to invite us, to follow the example of Jesus and be people who live from a place of abundance and not scarcity. That we would be people who notice others, people who notice ones others don't, who go into situations that others would shy away from, that we would call out the identity of all of God's human beings and say, "You are a child of God," and that we would offer peace to all that we meet. So I wonder, and I'm going to step out of character now and just be Letiah. I wonder if in this space there are folks who would say that they feel like they're in a desperate situation, whatever that looks like for you, and that you are in need of some resources, and it's a vulnerable place to ask for help or to even need help. But I would invite us all to take just a second and look around the room at all the faces here, and for those online, that you would notice those who are online with you, and to realize that God helps us to meet the needs of others in our vulnerability, because if we are coming from a place of abundance and not scarcity, then there's enough for everyone. And we're not in competition with one another because we are all children of God. So I hope that what we take away today, that we are to be people who live from a place of abundance and not scarcity. And as we move into this Thanksgiving week, that we are conscious of those who might be in need, who might be people that are ignored, and that we would notice, and that we would be an agent of healing in whatever way that looks, and that we would pronounce over them, "You are a child of God, go in peace." Amen.